The captive alien. In a distant galaxy, far from the peaceful planets of Earth, there was a harsh and unforgiving world ruled by a powerful alien lord. On this planet, many creatures from across the universe had been taken as slaves. Among them was a female alien whose name was Vala. She had been born on a beautiful world, but it was destroyed when her people were captured by the tyrannical rulers of this dark planet. Vala's life now was nothing like what it once had been. Once a proud and free individual, she had become just another cog in the machine of the alien lord's empire. Her body bore the marks of her suffering, bruises from the cruel beatings and the harsh labor that was forced upon her. She was forced to work in the mines, digging deep into the rocky earth for precious materials that the Lord would sell to other civilizations. The work was grueling, the hours long, and the hope of escape seemed like a distant dream that no longer had a place in her heart. Every day, she woke up in the cold, dark quarters of the slave pens. The sounds of chains and the cries of other slaves filled the air. She had learned to ignore the pain and the suffering of those around her, but that didn't mean she didn't feel it. She could still hear the desperation in their voices, the hopelessness that gripped them all. They had all resigned themselves to their fate, except for Vala. She wasn't ready to give up. Even after all these years, something deep inside her still burned with the desire for freedom. She would often lie awake at night, staring at the cold stone ceiling, wondering if there would ever be a chance to escape. But escape seemed impossible. The Lord's guards were everywhere, watching every move, every breath. The idea of running away, of breaking free, seemed like a fantasy. Yet, somehow, Vala clung to that fantasy. She had to believe that there was more to life than this. One day, as Vala was working in the mines, she heard something strange. There was a sudden noise above, the sound of footsteps echoing through the tunnels. At first, she thought it was just the usual patrol of guards, but something felt different this time. The footsteps were quick, urgent, and there was a rhythm to them that didn't match the slow pace of the guards. Vala's heart skipped a beat. Could this be someone trying to escape? She pushed the thought aside. No one had ever dared to escape before. But then, the noise grew louder, and to her surprise, the entrance to the mine was suddenly forced open. A figure appeared in the doorway, a human male. Vala's eyes widened. She had heard of humans before, strange, unpredictable creatures from a far-off world, but she had never seen one in person. She had been told they were weak, fragile beings who could barely survive in the harsh conditions of this alien world. But the man standing in front of her didn't look weak. In fact, he looked like he could take on the entire guard himself. He was tall, with dark, messy hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. His clothes were torn, his face smeared with dirt and sweat, but he didn't seem to care. There was a fire in his eyes, a kind of determination that Vala had never seen in the slaves around her. He wasn't here to be a prisoner. He was here to break free. Vala watched in disbelief as the man quickly overpowered the guards who were stationed at the mine entrance. They didn't stand a chance. With each movement, he demonstrated incredible skill and strength, taking them down one by one. It was as if he had been trained for this very moment, as if he had been preparing for years to face these enemies. The guards, confused and frightened by his sudden attack, didn't know what to do. They had never seen a human before, and now they were learning just how dangerous one could be. For a moment, Vala stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Her mind raced. Was this truly happening? Was this human here to help her? Or was he just another soldier sent by the Lord to maintain control over the slaves? She couldn't be sure, but something about the man made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The human turned to her and motioned for her to come closer. "You're free," he said in a voice that was rough but calm. His words were simple, but the sincerity in them was clear. Vala's heart raced. She looked around at the other slaves, still chained to their tasks, and for the first time, she felt the weight of their gaze on her. They all stared at her, unsure of what was happening. She was their symbol of hope, the one who had never given up on the idea of escape. They were all watching, waiting for her to make a choice. But Vala wasn't sure what to do. She had always been alone in her fight. This human had come out of nowhere, and she didn't know if she could trust him. Could he really offer her the freedom she had dreamed of? Or was this just another trick? Was this some kind of trap? The human, seeing the hesitation in her eyes, spoke again. "You don't have to stay here. You don't have to suffer anymore. I'm here to help you." Vala felt a rush of emotion overwhelm her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him. But her instincts told her to be cautious. Yet at that moment, something deep inside her stirred. The hope that had been buried for so long began to rise again. Maybe this was the chance she had been waiting for. Without another word, she made her decision. She ran toward the human, her chains rattling as she moved. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt like she had a chance to escape. As the human helped her through the mine's entrance and into the unknown, Vala realized that she wasn't alone anymore. She had someone beside her, someone who believed in her freedom as much as she did. And together, they would fight for a future far away from the chains of the alien lord. The unexpected rescue. Vala had never believed it could happen. Someone, a stranger, would come to her aid. She had spent so many years in the harshest conditions, trapped in the mines, that the idea of rescue seemed like a fantasy from a forgotten dream. But now, standing at the edge of the mines with the human beside her, she couldn't help but feel that everything she had endured might finally mean something. The sound of the guards' voices echoed through the tunnels. They were regaining their senses after being taken down by the human, their rage filling the air. Vala's heart raced. Time was running out. She didn't know how long they could stay hidden before the entire facility would be alerted. The human glanced back at her, his blue eyes focused with determination. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice calm yet filled with urgency. Vala nodded, clutching her ragged clothes to her body. The chains that had once bound her were gone, replaced by the terrifying sense of freedom that came with the unknown. She had never been free in her entire life, and now, this human, a strange and untrustworthy creature by all accounts, was offering her the one thing she had always longed for. But the question burned in her mind. Why? As they moved quickly through the narrow passageways, Vala couldn't help but wonder about him. Who was he? Why was he here? Was he a soldier sent by the humans to infiltrate the alien lord's stronghold, or was he simply a runaway from another corner of the galaxy? His quiet confidence suggested that he had been through this kind of danger before, but he hadn't shared any details with her yet. Vala glanced up at him. "Why are you helping me?" Her voice, hoarse from years of disuse, sounded foreign to her own ears. The human's pace never slowed as he led her through the dark corridors. His face remained serious, but his eyes softened when he answered her question. "Because you deserve to be free," he said simply. "No one should be a slave." His words struck a chord deep inside her, something that had long been buried under layers of fear and survival. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to believe in someone else's goodness. After years of watching slaves being treated like nothing more than tools, she had lost any hope that there was kindness left in the universe. "Why me?" she asked again, her voice a little stronger now, though still filled with uncertainty. "I'm just one slave. Why risk your life for me?" The human paused briefly before glancing at her over his shoulder. "Because I've seen enough of what's wrong with the galaxy. I'm tired of standing by and letting people like you suffer." Vala didn't understand. Who was this human? What could someone like him possibly know about the kind of pain she had experienced every single day? And why, out of all the people in the universe, had he chosen her? But before she could ask him more, the distant sound of guards shouting grew louder. The human's expression hardened, and without another word, he grabbed her hand and pulled her into a small side chamber. It was barely large enough for both of them, but it was hidden from the main corridor. They crouched low, breathless, as the guards rushed past the door, unaware of their presence. Vala could hear her own heartbeat, the adrenaline pumping through her veins. Her whole body was shaking. She had never been in a situation like this, never had the chance to run, to escape. The weight of it all, the shock of the sudden freedom, made her feel both alive and terrified. The human gave her a quick glance, his eyes scanning their surroundings. He was calm, controlled, but Vala could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers tightened around the weapon strapped to his side. The stakes were high now, and they were running out of time. "They'll be looking for us," the human muttered under his breath. "We need to move fast. Can you keep up?" Vala nodded, though she wasn't sure if she could. She had spent years in the mines, her strength sapped by endless labor. But something inside her stirred, a fierce desire to survive. If this human believed in her, then maybe, just maybe, she could believe in herself too. Without waiting for another word, the human motioned for her to follow him. They moved silently through the dark, twisting corridors, avoiding the guards at every turn. The silence between them was thick with unspoken questions, but neither of them dared to break it. Vala's mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. She was free, yes, but for how long? Could she trust this human? Suddenly, they reached the outer edge of the stronghold, where a small transport ship waited. The human quickly boarded, gesturing for Vala to follow. She hesitated for a moment, the finality of her escape sinking in. This was it. There would be no turning back. Once she boarded that ship, her life would never be the same again. With one last glance at the place that had been her prison for so long, Vala stepped onto the ship. The door slid shut behind her with a soft hiss, and the ship began to lift off the ground. She took a seat near the human, who was already preparing the ship for takeoff. He didn't look at her, didn't say a word, but his movements were fluid, confident. As the ship ascended into the dark sky, Vala looked out the small window. The planet, once a place of torment and fear, grew smaller and smaller as they climbed higher. She was leaving it behind, but she didn't know where they were going. She didn't know what her future would be. The human finally turned to her, his face softening slightly. "We're not safe yet, but we're going to make it," he said. "This is just the beginning, Vala." Her heart pounded, but for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, this human was more than just a rescuer. Maybe in the end, he could be her savior, her partner, her future. But as the ship streaked across the stars, Vala knew one thing for certain. Her life was about to change forever. Escape from the alien lords. The stars outside the small transport ship glittered like a million tiny promises, but inside, the air was thick with tension. Vala's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing the uncertainty of her new reality. She had never been outside the prison planet before. The world she had known, dark, suffocating, filled with pain, was gone. Now there was only the vast, cold expanse of space, and the human beside her who had somehow made it all possible. The ship hummed softly as it soared through the galaxy, but Vala couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The sudden escape, the sense of freedom, it all seemed too easy. She glanced at the human, who was focused on the controls, his hands moving swiftly, efficiently. He had said they weren't safe yet, and she could see the truth in his eyes. He was keeping something from her, something important. "Where are we going?" Vala asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the nervous tremor she felt. The human didn't look at her immediately, his attention on the ship's systems. "Somewhere safe," he replied shortly. His tone was sharp, but there was no anger, just a quiet determination. Vala wanted to press him for more details, to know exactly where they were heading, but she could sense that now was not the time. The urgency in his movements, the way his eyes flickered to the view screen every few seconds, it was clear they were being hunted. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. They weren't out of danger yet. In fact, they were just getting started. "I don't understand," Vala continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are they chasing us? Why would they care about one slave?" The human paused for a moment before answering, his voice steady, but tinged with something she couldn't quite place. "You're not just any slave. You're a symbol, a valuable prize. They'll come after you with everything they have." Vala frowned. "A symbol," she repeated. She couldn't grasp the meaning of his words. To her, she was just a slave, one of many who had been broken and discarded. Why would she matter to them? The human's eyes met hers for the first time since they had boarded the ship. The alien lord who enslaved you isn't just some petty tyrant. He's part of a much larger empire. The kind of empire that doesn't tolerate anyone escaping. But it's more than that. You're special, Vala. You have something they want. Vala's stomach twisted. What do you mean? She felt a sudden rush of fear, like something terrible was about to be revealed. Before he could answer, the ship shuddered, and a loud alarm blared through the cabin. The sudden noise made Vala jump, her eyes wide in panic. The human cursed under his breath. "We're not alone anymore." Vala's breath caught in her throat as the ship's viewscreen displayed a series of red blips. Several fast-moving objects were closing in on them, their trajectories unmistakable. "They found us," the human muttered. "Brace yourself." Vala's heart leaped into her throat as the ship veered sharply to the left, its engine screaming as the human tried to evade the pursuing ships. But it was clear that they were faster, more maneuverable. The human had led them away from the stronghold, but it seemed like it had only bought them a little time. "Why can't we outrun them?" Vala asked, fear edging her voice. "What kind of ships are they?" The human's hands flew over the controls, his face tense. "They're faster than anything we've got. They'll chase us across the galaxy if they have to. But I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." Vala swallowed hard. She had never been in space combat before, had never experienced the terror of being hunted by ships like these. The thought of being captured again, returned to her former life as a slave, was more than she could bear. The ship jolted as a laser blast struck their rear shield. Sparks flew from the control panel, and the lights flickered. The human cursed again, his hands working furiously to keep the ship intact. "Hold on," he shouted, his voice strained. Vala's grip tightened on the seat, her body pressed against the cold metal as the ship made another sharp turn. The enemy ships were gaining on them, their weapons targeting the vulnerable sections of the ship. The human worked with quick, practiced movements. "Vala, I need you to trust me," he said. "We're going to make a jump. It's risky, but it's our best shot." Vala's mind raced. A jump? To where? She had no idea what he was talking about, but there was something in his voice that made her believe he knew what he was doing. It was the only chance they had. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The human didn't waste any time. With a series of quick adjustments, he activated a special engine. The ship shook violently as the engine roared to life, pushing them faster than Vala thought possible. The stars outside the window stretched into long lines, like the ship was moving faster than light itself. "Hold tight," the human yelled as the ship made a sudden jump, plunging them into the unknown. The moment the jump began, Vala felt her stomach lurch, and everything around her seemed to distort. Her vision blurred, and she couldn't tell up from down. She gripped the seat harder, fighting the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her. Was this the end? Was she about to die in the void of space? The jump lasted only moments, but when the ship finally stabilized, Vala was left breathless, her body still trembling. She looked around, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The human was sitting back in his seat, his face grim but relieved. "We're safe, for now." Vala glanced at the view screen, but there was nothing to see except empty space. No enemy ships. No threat. Just silence. "Where are we?" Vala asked, her voice shaky. The human turned to her, his expression softening for the first time. "We're in uncharted space. They'll never find us here." Vala took a deep breath, her heart slowing as she let the reality of their escape sink in. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. But as the silence stretched between them, Vala couldn't help but wonder, what had the human meant when he said she was special? And why were the alien lords willing to risk so much to capture her? The answers were still out there, and Vala knew that her journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Safe haven. The ship floated in the eerie silence of uncharted space. Vala could feel her heart slowly returning to a normal rhythm as the rush of fear from the escape began to fade. But even in this moment of peace, her mind remained restless, filled with questions. What was it about her that made the alien lords chase her so relentlessly? What did the human mean when he said she was special? And why, after everything, had he risked his life to rescue her? The human sat at the controls, his gaze fixed on the view screen. He didn't seem to notice how tense Vala still was. His hands moved with mechanical precision as he adjusted their course, ensuring that no one would follow them. But even as he did, he kept glancing at the empty stretch of space beyond the ship, as though waiting for something. "Are we really safe?" Vala asked softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. The human glanced over at her. "For now," he replied. "They won't find us here. Not for a while." "Where are we going?" she pressed, her curiosity now outweighing her fear. "Somewhere far from everything," he answered with a faint smile. "Somewhere quiet." The response wasn't much, but it was enough to put a small sliver of hope in Vala's chest. For the first time in her life, she had the possibility of peace. No more chains, no more endless labor. The thought of what her future could hold made her almost giddy with anticipation. But at the same time, the uncertainty of it all weighed heavily on her. As the hours passed, the ship drifted deeper into the unknown, away from the familiar star systems. Vala spent the time trying to adjust to her new reality. She explored the small, sparse cabin of the ship, trying to make herself at ease, though everything still felt foreign. The human had set up a small sleeping area, but she couldn't bring herself to rest just yet. Her mind wouldn't let her. The silence stretched between them, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was peaceful, but Vala couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something was off. The human had been kind to her, but he was a stranger, and she had no idea where they were headed, or what lay ahead. "Why did you rescue me?" Vala asked again, her voice breaking the quiet tension. This time, she was determined to know the answer. The human paused. He seemed to weigh his words carefully before finally speaking. "I didn't just rescue you, Vala. I'm not a hero," he said, his voice surprisingly vulnerable for the first time. "I'm doing this because there's something more at stake than just your freedom. Something much bigger." Vala narrowed her eyes, not understanding. "What do you mean?" The human stood up and walked over to a small table, rummaging through a compartment in the wall. He pulled out a small device and placed it on the table. It was a small handheld data pad, its surface glowing faintly in the dim light of the cabin. "Let me show you," he said, turning the pad on. Vala watched as the human tapped a few buttons, and a holographic map appeared above the device. It showed a network of planets, some marked with red symbols. At first, Vala didn't understand what she was looking at, but as the human zoomed in on one of the planets, she realized it was her home world, her destroyed world. The human watched her closely, noticing the way her expression shifted. "Your world wasn't just destroyed, Vala," he continued. "It was targeted, destroyed deliberately." Vala's breath caught in her throat. "What? How? Why?" The human took a deep breath. "Your people had something. A resource, a technology, something the alien lords needed. They wanted it, and when your people refused to give it up, they destroyed your world." Vala's mind reeled as the truth began to sink in. She had thought her planet's destruction was just a result of the endless wars and conquests that tore through the galaxy. But now, hearing the human's words, she realized that her people hadn't been destroyed by a natural disaster or a war. They had been targeted, and she had been a part of that world, trapped in its collapse, unable to stop it. "But why me?" she whispered. What do I have to do with it? The human's gaze softened. He gestured toward the map again, zooming in on a small red dot beside her home planet. This is where you come in. This is where the alien lords think you're hiding something. They believe that you have knowledge, something hidden, something that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. Vala shook her head in confusion. I don't know anything. I don't even understand what you're talking about. I know, the human said, his voice quiet but urgent. But they think you do. And now that you're free, they'll stop at nothing to get to you. A cold shiver ran down Vala's spine. She had thought she was just a simple slave, someone insignificant. But now she was learning that she had been caught in the middle of something far larger than she could have ever imagined. You're telling me they destroyed my world because of something I might know? She asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. Yes, the human confirmed. But they're wrong. I believe you don't know anything. But they'll come after you until they're sure. Vala felt her world tilt. She had always seen herself as small, insignificant, even just another slave. But now she realized that everything she had endured, everything she had fought for, was tied to a much greater battle. One that she hadn't even understood until now. The human sat beside her, his expression serious. I'm not just helping you because I feel sorry for you, Vala. I'm helping you because this fight isn't over. And you're a part of it now. Vala looked at him, trying to comprehend everything he was saying. Her life had just been turned upside down, and she didn't know whether to be terrified or grateful. Where do we go from here? She asked, the weight of the future pressing on her shoulders. The human's eyes met hers, his face determined. We fight. We survive. And we make sure they never get their hands on you. No matter what. Vala nodded slowly, realizing that her escape was just the beginning. There was no turning back now. And whatever lay ahead, she would face it with the human by her side. But as they sailed through the uncharted space, Vala couldn't help but wonder what secrets her past held and what kind of future awaited them both. A new life together. The days blended together as the ship continued to drift through the void of space, a small speck against the infinite blackness. Vala spent much of her time staring out at the stars, contemplating the things the human had shared with her. Each revelation seemed to peel away another layer of the life she had known, revealing a truth that was both liberating and terrifying. Her world, her past, and her future were all connected to something much bigger than she could have ever imagined. She had learned that the human's name was Kieran, and that he wasn't just some wandering mercenary or adventurer. He was a part of a larger group of rebels who opposed the empire of the alien lords, the very empire that had enslaved her people and destroyed her world. They had been fighting for years to bring down the corrupt, oppressive rule of the alien lords, and Vala had unwittingly become a key player in their struggle. As the days passed, Vala's thoughts began to shift from fear to something else. Hope. A strange, unfamiliar feeling began to settle in her chest. She had always thought of herself as a survivor, someone who had learned to live with the worst of circumstances. But now, in the company of Kieran, she was starting to believe that she could be something more than just a survivor. She could be a fighter. She could be someone who mattered. Despite the danger that still hung over them like a shadow, the two of them slowly began to build a life together aboard the ship. It was a small, cramped vessel, but it had everything they needed: food, shelter, and most importantly, safety. Kieran taught her how to navigate the ship's systems, how to repair its basic components, and how to avoid detection by the alien lords' patrols. They began to develop a routine. Each day, they would check the ship's course, make adjustments to avoid the enemy, and discuss their plans for the future. At night, they would sit together in the small lounge area, sharing stories of their past. Kieran's tales of his own world, of the battles he had fought, the losses he had suffered, were raw and real. But it was his quiet moments of vulnerability, when he spoke of his regrets and the weight of the choices he had made, that surprised Vala the most. She had always believed that humans were ruthless and selfish, just as the alien lords had described them. But Karen was nothing like what she had been taught to expect. He was driven, yes, but he was also kind, compassionate, and willing to risk everything for someone he barely knew. As the days stretched into weeks, Vala began to feel a bond forming between them, something deeper than mere survival. She had been alone for so long, trapped in the mines, isolated from everything and everyone. Now she was starting to trust again, starting to believe that there was more to life than fear and pain. One evening, as the ship glided silently through a nebula, Vala and Kieran found themselves sitting together, watching the colorful gases swirl around them, creating a surreal and beautiful display in the vast emptiness of space. "Do you ever wonder if it's possible to just escape all of this?" Vala asked softly, her voice almost lost in the hum of the ship. Kieran glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Escape from what?" "From the war, from the Empire, from the never-ending fight," she said. "Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever find a place where we don't have to look over our shoulders." Kieran's expression softened, his eyes distant. "I don't think there's a place like that, Vala. Not until we take the fight to them. But maybe the fight isn't the end of it. Maybe the future we're fighting for is something better than we've ever had before." Vala looked down at her hands, her thoughts racing. She had spent so long as a prisoner, so long in the grip of fear, that she hadn't allowed herself to dream of a better future. She had never considered what it would be like to live without the shadow of oppression hanging over her. But Karen's words made her question everything. Maybe there was hope. Maybe together they could change the galaxy. As the nebula outside swirled with color, Vala looked at Kieran and felt a shift inside her. She wasn't just a slave anymore. She wasn't just someone who had been used and broken. She was Vala, and she had the power to shape her own future. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Kieran raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For showing me that there's more to life than surviving," she replied, her eyes meeting his. "For giving me a reason to fight." Kieran didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at her with that steady gaze of his, and then he nodded. "We're in this together now, Vala. We're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for a future where people like you, like me, can finally live without fear." Vala felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. It wasn't just a promise. It was a truth. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't the scared, broken alien who had been trapped on a distant world. She was part of something bigger now, part of a fight that could change everything. But even as the sense of hope grew inside her, a question lingered in the back of her mind. The alien lords were not known for their mercy, and their pursuit of her would not stop simply because she had escaped. As much as she wanted to believe they could start anew, she knew the enemy wouldn't rest until they had her back. They would stop at nothing to recapture her, to claim the prize they believed she was. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Vala and Kieran were no longer just survivors. They were warriors, bound together by their pasts, their present, and the fight they would face in the future. And no matter what came next, they would face it side by side. As the ship continued to glide through the stars, Vala could feel the weight of what was ahead. The galaxy was vast, and their enemies were many. But together, they had a chance, and that was all that mattered now. A fight for freedom. The days spent in the quiet safety of uncharted space were beginning to feel like a distant dream. Vala had tried to settle into the routine of their new life, but the unsettling truth always lingered in the back of her mind. The alien lords weren't going to stop hunting her. No matter how far they traveled, no matter how many safe havens they found, the relentless pursuit of those in power would continue until they got what they wanted. The calm that had come with their escape was now overshadowed by the reality of what they faced. The galaxy wasn't just vast, it was filled with danger, and they were no longer just two individuals looking for a place to hide. They were part of something bigger, and the enemy was closing in. Vala had never fought in a battle before. She had never held a weapon, never learned the art of war. Her skills had always been those of a survivor, how to endure, how to stay hidden, how to make it through another day. But now, standing on the ship's bridge, her mind focused on the task ahead. She realized that survival wasn't enough anymore. "We need to be ready," Kieran said, breaking the silence as he approached her, his voice low but filled with determination. "They won't stop until they have you back. But we're not going to make it easy for them." Vala looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and resolve. "What do you mean?" Kieran walked over to a console and began pulling up schematics of the alien lord's fleets. Massive warships with highly advanced weapons and defenses. The sight of it made her stomach tighten, but she couldn't look away. She needed to understand what they were up against. "We don't just hide anymore," Kieran continued, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. "We take the fight to them. We hit them where it hurts." Vala felt her pulse quicken. "We fight them. But how? I don't know anything about combat." "You don't have to be a soldier," Kieran said, turning to face her. "You're the key to this fight, Vala. They're after you because of what you represent. But we can use that. We can take down their fleet, their strongholds. I've got a plan, but it's risky. We need to strike fast, hit them where they're weakest." The gravity of his words hung in the air between them. Vala had never thought of herself as a weapon, as something powerful. She had always been just a pawn in the game of the galaxy's power struggles. But now she was realizing that the choice wasn't just about escaping anymore. She was part of a revolution. The enemy wasn't just going to let her walk away. They would burn everything in their path to bring her back. And if that was the case, then she would make sure they paid for it. She straightened, a new sense of determination filling her chest. "What do you need me to do?" Kieran studied her for a moment, as if weighing her readiness. "There's a research facility, a place they've been using to study the resistance movements. They've got something we need there, a weapon capable of disrupting their fleet's communication systems. If we can get to it, we can cripple their ability to coordinate their attacks." Vala nodded, understanding the plan. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give them an edge. The enemy relied on their technology to control everything, and if they could strike at that, it would give them the opportunity they needed to turn the tide. "You're sure about this?" Vala asked, though she already knew the answer. The human had never hesitated before. "I've been sure about a lot of things in my life," Kieran said, his voice grim. "But this is our chance. We need to take it." The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Kieran walked Vala through the ship's systems, showing her how to use the basic defense equipment. He instructed her on how to fire the weapons and used the ship's shields to block enemy fire. Vala had never imagined herself in a position like this. Never thought she would be learning to fight, let alone leading a mission against the empire that had controlled her entire life. When the time came, they set their course for the research facility. It was located on a remote planet on the outer edge of the galaxy, far from the alien lord's main strongholds, but still within their reach. The ship hummed quietly as it accelerated toward their target, the tension between them palpable. Vala stood beside Kieran, her eyes focused on the screen in front of them. The final stretch of their journey was close, and she felt the weight of it on her shoulders. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was a fight for everything. Freedom, dignity, a future. "We're almost there," Kieran said, his voice tight with concentration. "Stay sharp. The facility will be heavily guarded. We can't afford any mistakes." Vala nodded, gripping the edge of her seat. She had spent her whole life being hunted, being chased by those who saw her as nothing more than a tool to be used. But now, the tables were turning. She wasn't running anymore. She was ready to stand her ground. As the ship entered the atmosphere of the remote planet, the adrenaline kicked in. They were almost there. The research facility came into view, a massive, sleek structure nestled between jagged mountains, surrounded by high-tech security systems and armed guards. It looked like an impenetrable fortress, but Vala knew better than to underestimate Kieran. He had a plan, and he had never been wrong before. The ship began to descend, low and fast, dodging enemy patrols and obstacles. Vala's heart raced, the anticipation almost unbearable. She had never felt anything like this before. Her entire life had been spent trying to survive, to stay hidden. But now she was ready to fight, to take back control. The ship shuddered as it touched down just outside the facility's perimeter. Karen was already preparing for the infiltration. "Remember, we need to get in and out quickly. The weapon's inside, but we don't know how heavily guarded it is. Stay close. Stay focused." Vala took a deep breath, nodding. She was no longer just the prisoner. She was the one who had the power to change everything. With Karen by her side, they had a chance, and she would fight for it, no matter the cost. As the hatch opened and they stepped onto the barren ground outside the facility, Vala felt the weight of the moment settle in. There was no turning back now. This was their fight, and she was ready to give everything to win it. The final victory. The cold winds of the barren planet whipped around them as Vala and Karen crouched low, moving swiftly through the shadows. The research facility loomed ahead, a giant, imposing structure bristling with security and alien technology. The sounds of distant patrols echoed in the still air, but Karen was already several steps ahead, his movements smooth and calculated. "We're almost there," he whispered, his voice steady. "Once we're inside, we'll have limited time before the alarm goes off. You ready?" Vala looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. There was no turning back now. She wasn't just fighting for her own freedom anymore. She was fighting for the future of everyone oppressed by the alien lords, for the thousands of people who had suffered under their cruel reign. And she was ready. "I'm ready," she replied, her voice firm, though the fear inside her was hard to ignore. With a nod, Karen activated a small device in his hand, a signal jammer that would temporarily disable the facility's security systems. The massive gates ahead of them slowly groaned open, allowing them entry. It was their only chance, and they had to make it count. They slipped inside, moving like shadows through the corridors, their steps silent on the cold metal floor. The facility was eerily quiet, save for the hum of machinery and the occasional murmur of the guards. But Vala didn't focus on the fear that gripped her. She focused on the mission: get to the weapon, disable the alien lord's communications, and escape without getting caught. They reached the central chamber, where the weapon was housed. The device was larger than she had imagined. A complex array of wires, lights, and alien technology, all working together to create something deadly. Vala could feel her pulse quicken as Karen approached the control panel, his fingers flying over the interface. "Just a few more seconds," Karen muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We need to activate the disruptor and shut down their communications. This will give us a fighting chance." Vala watched the door nervously. Her heart raced, the knowledge that they were seconds away from being discovered hanging over them like a storm cloud. She couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't going to make it out without a fight. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the loud, shrill sound of an alarm echoed throughout the facility. The security system had detected their presence. "They found us," Kieran said, his voice grim. "We don't have much time. Get ready." Vala instinctively reached for the weapon Kieran had given her earlier. The weight of it felt strange in her hands, but as she aimed it at the entrance, she felt a sense of purpose flood her veins. This was it. This was the moment that could turn the tide of the war. The alien lords were strong, but they weren't invincible. Not anymore. The doors to the chamber burst open with a violent crash. A squad of armed alien soldiers stormed in, their weapons aimed directly at Vala and Kieran. The world slowed as Vala's pulse quickened, the sound of her heartbeat deafening in her ears. Kieran acted without hesitation. He fired first, taking down the nearest guard with a well-placed shot. The room erupted in chaos as laser blasts filled the air. Vala fired her weapon, her hands shaking, but the shot was true. One soldier went down, then another. Her heart raced as the weight of the moment pressed down on her. But even as they fought, She couldn't ignore the feeling that something was off. The facility was too quiet, too easy. They had been planning this for weeks, but something about the situation made her uneasy. Why hadn't they encountered more resistance? Keep pushing, Kieran shouted as he fired again, taking down another soldier. We're almost there. Vala didn't hesitate. She ducked behind a column and sprinted toward the disruptor, the sound of blaster fire echoing in her ears. With a swift motion, she slammed her hand on the activation button. The weapon hummed to life, and a pulse of energy shot out, reverberating through the facility. The alien lord's communication systems were down. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The enemy soldiers paused, momentarily disoriented by the sudden loss of connection. Vala's heart raced as she realized what had just happened. They had done it. The disruptor had worked. But before they could celebrate, the doors to the chamber slammed shut with a deafening crash. An armored figure appeared at the far end of the room, the alien lord. His imposing form radiated power and authority, and his eyes locked on Vala. "You," he hissed, his voice cold with disdain. "You dared defy me." Vala felt her breath catch in her throat, her body instinctively tensing. The alien lord was more terrifying than she had imagined, but she refused to let fear consume her. She wasn't just a slave anymore. She wasn't the person she used to be. She had a purpose now. "You destroyed my world," Vala said, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. "You took everything from me. But I'm done running. I'm done hiding." The alien lord sneered. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing. You're a tool, a pawn." Kieran stepped forward, his weapon raised. "You're wrong," he said, his voice fierce. "She's not a pawn. She's the one who's going to bring you down." The alien lord's eyes narrowed, and in a flash, he raised his hand, sending a blast of energy toward Kieran. But Vala reacted instinctively. She pushed Kieran aside, taking the full brunt of the blast herself. The pain was excruciating, but Vala gritted her teeth, refusing to fall. This was her fight, her sacrifice, her moment. With one final desperate surge of strength, Vala fired her weapon at the alien lord. The shot hit its mark, and the energy from the disruptor reverberated through the chamber, knocking the alien lord to the ground. The room fell silent. Vala collapsed to her knees, her vision blurry. Kieran rushed to her side, his hand on her shoulder. "Vala, Vala, you did it. You stopped him." She smiled weakly, her body shaking, but a feeling of triumph swept over her. The battle wasn't over, but they had struck the first blow. The alien lords had underestimated her. They had underestimated humanity's will to fight back. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Vala felt that the galaxy was hers to shape. She wasn't a slave. She was a warrior, and she had just changed the course of history. Together, they would fight. Together, they would win.